Welcome back. Each Saturday, as part of the Shabbat morning synagogue service, a Torah scroll, handwritten on parchment, is brought out of the ark at the front of the synagogue, and the weekly Torah portion is read. These weekly portions cover the entire 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, in order over the course of each year. This annual cycle of readings begins with the opening chapters of Genesis on the first Saturday after the Feast of Tabernacles, and concludes with the final verses of Deuteronomy on the last day of that festival a year later. But there are a few weeks in the year, a few Shabbats, when in addition to the weekly Torah portion, another passage from the Torah is read, added on after the weekly portion. These additional readings are chosen because of their connection to significant events on the Jewish calendar that will be taking place in the week that follows. This coming Saturday is an example. It is the Shabbat before the festival of Purim. Purim, of course, commemorates the victory of the Jews over a genocidal enemy led by Haman, as recorded in the book of Esther. So, on the Sabbath prior to Purim each year, in addition to this week's weekly portion from the closing chapters of the book of Exodus, it happens to be this week, synagogues around the world will read the following passage from Deuteronomy. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked you in the back, all the stragglers at your rear, when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore, it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around you, in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you must blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. In these verses, Moses commands the children of Israel to eternally remember what Amalek did to them. Back in the book of Exodus, 40 years before Deuteronomy, just after the children of Israel left Egypt, Amalek attacked Israel. As we read there in Exodus 18, Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. And his hands were steady until the sun set. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people by the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens." And Moses built an altar, and he called it, "The Lord is my banner." And he said, "Because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." I want to draw your attention to the opening words of this passage I just read, the beginning of this episode. Amalek came and fought with Israel. Where'd they come from? Why doesn't the Bible simply say Amalek attacked Israel? What the Bible is telling us is that Amalek did not attack Israel because Israel had approached their territory. The children of Israel were nowhere near the territory of Amalek. The Amalekites traveled out into the desert to attack Israel for no reason. Israel posed no threat to them and had not provoked them. So why did Amalek attack? To answer that question, let's ask another question. What was Amalek thinking? Think about it. The Egyptian superpower had just been decimated by 10 miraculous plagues. Blood, frogs, you know the list. Then to top it off, God split the Red Sea, saving Israel and drowning the Egyptian army in the most overtly supernatural display of divine power ever seen. Why on earth would Amalek attack Israel at that moment? Did they really think they were going to defeat the God of Israel after what he had just done to Egypt? The answer is that Amalek believed in chance and coincidence. They believed that while there is a God, God's will is random and subject to chance, that God doesn't really direct things down here on earth. The fact that God saved Israel on one day says nothing about what will happen on the next. The possibility that God directs the course of history, the history of a specific people, to bring holiness into the world, was repugnant to Amalek. To put this another way, the only way to explain the irrational audacity of Amalek in attacking Israel immediately after the Exodus is to conclude that they did not believe that God had any providential relationship with Israel. And this is what makes Amalek Israel's arch enemy. The primary purpose of the nation of Israel is to be a vehicle for the revelation of God in this world. In other words, Israel's purpose is not Israel. Israel's purpose is that God reveals himself through Israel by directing our history in miraculous ways. The Egyptians who witnessed the 10 plagues recognized God through his redemption of Israel. You see that in the book of Exodus. Similarly, in our time, the unprecedented, biblically foretold, miraculous return of the nation of Israel to our land testifies to God's control over history. But not everyone sees it that way. The enemies of Israel do not see the ingathering of millions of Jews to Israel as the fulfillment of God's biblical promises. To them, God's not involved in history at all. To believe that God has no special concern for Israel and that whatever happens in history is due to human action and chance is the essence of Amalek. As our passage puts it, they had no fear of God. Many people today say they believe in God, but they don't really believe that he directs history. They don't fear him. Like Amalek, Israel's enemies of today, Hamas, Hezbollah, and their allies on the progressive left, deny the truth of the God of Israel. They refuse to accept the possibility that God's biblical promises are being fulfilled on this earth. So they attack us. They attack us for the same reason Amalek attacked us over 3,300 years ago. They attack us to show the world that there's nothing special about Israel, that the God of the Bible does not govern history. I mentioned the fact that Amalek was attacking Israel immediately after God had just utterly decimated Egypt in the most miraculous way, and how irrational that was. We have to assume that Amalek was ready for the possibility that God would lash out at them just as he did to the Egyptians. And yet they were still willing to attack. The Amalekites, it would appear, were the first suicide bombers, terrorists who went out of their way to attack Israel even though they knew that there was a high likelihood that they'd be killed in the process. For all these reasons, Amalek represents the evil in humanity, the desire to kill in the name of defeating the God and people of Israel. We read this passage right before the festival of Purim, not only to remind us that history repeats itself, that we have genocidal enemies. Notice that God did not wipe out the Amalekites with miracles like the 10 plagues or the splitting of the sea. Instead, God told Moses to tell Joshua to get men to fight. And the message could not be clearer. When evil rears its head, God-fearing people are called upon to wage war to defeat it. In the words of Moses to Joshua, choose men and go out and fight Amalek. Folks, the Bible's coming to life before our very eyes. Words written thousands of years ago describe the headlines of the day. And today, just as in the time of the book of Exodus and the book of Esther, Israel faces enemies who refuse to acknowledge the God of the Bible, the God of Israel. And just as it was in those times, Israel will win. The enemies of Israel always lose in the end. And just like the Bible says, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. In other words, the battle against evil is eternal. No generation is exempt from fighting it. If you enjoyed this teaching, if you found it meaningful, check out my author page at Israel365.com and be sure to get a copy of my latest book of Bible teachings, Verses for Zion. Verses for Zion contains 77 short, daily devotion-length Bible studies, each one only a few pages long, where I use insights from the original Hebrew to draw out inspiring lessons from the scriptures that are lost to those who read the Bible only in English translation. So go to getvfz.com to purchase your copy. You'll get 20% off at checkout. This book's not available on Amazon. The only way to get it, once again, is getvfz, Verses for Zion, getvfz.com. Folks, this brings us to the end of the show, the debut episode of Eyes on Israel. Thank you so much for watching. God bless, and be sure to catch us next week and every week right here on Real America's Voice.